This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Bruchim Aboim. Baruch haba, welcome everyone to the Agar de Perka Shiur, Monday morning, Parshas. Boy, please excuse my voice. Today's our regular Monday Shiur. Tomorrow, I believe at 12 o'clock, will be a national Agar de Perka Shiur on the same channels. You could pick it up on the Zoom. You could pick it up on the phone line or on our website, rabbidg.com. 12 tomorrow, a special Shiur on Parsha Sefer Shemos. Today I would like to examine a well-known Gemara, Masechta Brachos, and Daf Yudaled Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Amar Ula, Kol HaKoirei Kriya Shema B'loi Tefillin Ki'ilu Meir Edo Sheker B'atzmai. Anyone who recites Shema without wearing tefillin, it's like testifying false testimony be'atzmai, against himself. What does that mean, be'atzmai, against himself? So some learn be'atzmai means God. Atzmai is, so to speak, a euphemism of God. It's like testifying falsely against himself. Kriya Shema, you're testifying to the oneness, the uniqueness, the unity of the Creator. And if you don't wear tefillin, it's like you're falsely testifying against Him, with a capital H. Others learn, and the difficulty with this pshat is, atzma usually means yourself, doesn't usually refer to God. So others learn that someone who says Shema without tefillin, it's like testifying falsely against yourself, because you're saying ukshartam, uchsavtam, you should write the tefillin, you should wear the tefillin, and you're not wearing it. So it's like you're testifying against yourself. So these are the two classical interpretations of what Ula meant, Kol HaKoirei Kriya Shema B'loi Tefillin Ki'ilu Meir Edo Sheker B'atzmai. However, B'siyata D'Shmaya, we would like to offer a new pshat, another understanding of what Chazal mean, Kol HaKoirei Kriya Shema B'loi Tefillin Ki'ilu Meir Edo Sheker B'atzmai. Now we know that there's a fundamental difference between the way the tefillin shel yad are made and the way the tefillin shel rosh are made. The tefillin shel yad are made out of one bias. You take one piece of leather and you make one compartment, as opposed to the tefillin shel rosh, where you make 4 compartments. The Shulchan Aruch says in Siman Lamed Beis, Yaseh Daled Batim, you should make 4 houses. Me'ar echad l'shel rosh, from one piece of hide for the shel rosh, u'bayis echad l'shel yad, and one bias of the shel yad. Why? Why is that? Why? We know that the tefillin shel rosh has more kedusha than the tefillin shel yad, but why do we make the tefillin shel rosh with 4 compartments? Because after all, what it says in the tefillin shel rosh is exactly the same as what it says in the Tefillin Shel Yad. There's not any different information. So why do we have 4 compartments in the Tefillin Shel Rosh and 1 compartment in the Tefillin Shel Yad? So the Matei Moshe, the Talmud Muvak of the Maharshal, he writes that when we put on tefillin, one should be mechavein, that Hashem commanded us to put on the 4 Parshas that have the unity of God's name and Yetzias Mitzrayim on the arm opposite the heart, on the head opposite the mind. And then the Matei Moshe says on the 4th line, Inami, Al Hazroya Keneged Chush Hamishu Shetala Biyad. We put our tefillin on the arm corresponding to the sense of touch, which is dependent on the hand. And therefore the tefillin of the yad only has 1 compartment, because it corresponds to the sense of touch. V'al ha'rosh, we put tefillin on the head, keneged the chushim, the senses of the head, which are seeing, listening, smelling, tasting. We know we have 5 senses: sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. 4 of the 5 senses are in the head, 1 of them is in the arm. So says the Matei Moshe, Davar nifla'ad ma'od. The Tefillin Shel Rosh has 4 senses, has 4 batim, keneged the 4 senses of the head. The Tefillin Shel Yad has 1 bias, keneged the 1 bias, keneged the 1 sense of the hand. And that is, says the Matei Moshe, v'zeh kadei sheyisoirer adam chamisha chushav. This is in order for a person to be aroused in his 5 senses. V'yizkar chaste kel yisbarach. And remember the kindness of the Lord. B'yitzias Mitzrayim, in the Exodus, through the miracles He did for us. That testify to God's unity, that God is one in the world, and He has the ability in the upper worlds and the lower worlds. And therefore, says the Matei Moshe, you should hang down the straps, that they should be hanging before you, that the right strap should reach at least the navel, to hint that the influence of this lowly world, that Hashem's influence reaches the lowest world, the Tibur Ha'olam, as opposed to those who say that God's Hashgacha only reaches the moon and nothing lower. Okay, so the bottom line is that the reason why we have 4 batim of the Tefillin Shel Rosh is connected the 4 senses that are connected to the head: sight, smell, taste, and hearing, as opposed to the Tefillin Shel Yad, which corresponds to the sense of touch. Well, since there's only 1 sense associated with the arm, therefore the Tefillin Shel Yad has 1 bias. From here we learn that one of the chief functions of Tefillin is to subjugate one's senses to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, it's not enough just to follow the direct dictates of the Torah. Don't do this, don't say that, but even one's senses have to be subject and subservient to the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Meaning, we're not authorized to look at whatever pleases us. We're not authorized to listen to whatever we would like to. We're not authorized to touch whatever we feel like it. So all these senses have to be subjugated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and by wearing the tefillin, it helps us, so to speak, subjugate these senses to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This idea is offered by the Eliyah Rabbah as well. The Eliyah Rabbah in Siman Chaf Hei, by the way, tefillin is in Siman Chaf Hei, the way you remember it is Yad Keha, the weaker hand. The Eliyah Rabbah says, another reason for the tefillin of the arm is keneged, the sense of touch. Therefore, there's only 1 bias. And on the Rosh, there are 4 batim, keneged the 4 chushim, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, in order to arouse yourself with all your senses to thank and appreciate the kindness of Hashem. In fact, the Rosh, in other words, not only is this idea based in the words of the Achronim, but this is found in the Rishonim as well, and that is the Rosh in his commentary to this week's Parsha. He says, in the Tefillin Shel Rosh, there are 4 Parshas, keneged the 4 senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, speaking. Now technically, speaking is not a sense. It refers to the sense of the mouth. But in the hand, there's only 1 bias, keneged the sense of touching, and therefore it's enough to have 1 bias. By the way, I once read in the biography of the Ben Ish Chai that in Havdalah we make a bracha, Borei Pri Agafen, Borei Minei Besamim, Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh, Baruch HaMavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chayil. Why is that the order of the brachas? Says the holy Ben Ish Chai, it's ascending in terms of the location on the head. First, Borei Pri Agafen, you taste with your mouth. Borei Minei Besamim, you smell with your nose. Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh, you see with your eyes. Hamavdil, you differentiate with the mind. Any good Sfardim on the Shiur? Yaakov, what's going on? Where'd you go? Okay, we'll get him when he comes back. We're talking about Besamim. The Arizal says to smell Besamim after Kiddush Friday night, or before Kiddush Friday night. So, anybody do that here? So I was learning about that on Friday, and I tried adopting it, but it did not go over well by the boss in the house. So I have to discuss it with some of the Svardim. This is what the Arizal says, to be mashlam meya brachos, and for other reasons to be in the onset of Shabbos. But I believe Svardim smell hadassim specifically at the beginning of the Shabbat. Okay, let's move on. Now that we're learning that the purpose of tefillin is to subjugate the chushim, the senses, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the words of the Rambam become more meaningful. The Rambam says, Kedushas tefillin, Kedushasan gedoylahi. The sanctity of tefillin is very great. Shekozman shahat tefillin b'roishai. So long as tefillin are on your head, shaladam, v'alzroya, and on your arm, hu anav, it makes a person humble, v'yirei shamayim, and God-fearing, v'einoi nimshach b'schoik, you're not drawn after levity, uv'sicha b'tela, and idle chatter, v'einoi maharer machshavos rois, you don't have improper thoughts, evil thoughts, ela mefane libay, b'divrei ha'emes v'atzedek, you're able to clear your thoughts for true and righteous ideas. Lefikach tzarech ha'adam l'shtadel, therefore a person should try to have tefillin on as much as possible. We know that in our very weak generation, because it's so hard for us to guard ourselves b'kedusha, v'tara, we only wear it for tefillah. But the Rambam says so long as a person wears tefillin, it humbles a person. It makes a person more God-fearing. This works well with the notion that we say we have 5 batim total in the tefillin. 4 on the head, connected the 4 senses of the head. 1 on the arm, connected the sense of the arm. And the objective of the tefillin is to subjugate, to make a person realize that we look at what we're authorized to, we listen to what we're authorized to, and all the senses are governed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Well, the Gra takes this idea even further. Says the Heilige Gra. We know that the Gemara says in Brachas and Avav that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wears tefillin. Because the inyan of tefillin is to tie and to bind thought, contemplation. Now we know there are 5 senses. 4 of them are in the moyach. And from the brain emanates the 4 senses. The 5th sense is touch, which is really in the whole body. So the Gra says, just like the brain is the central command station of the 4 senses, the heart is the central command station of the sense of touch. Which is interesting, because one would have thought the same way the 4 senses are controlled by the brain, touch is also. But there's an idea that since the heart is maybe the largest muscle in the body, it's, so to speak, the governor of touch. And therefore, we put tefillin on the head, opposite the brain, 4 batim opposite the brain, because the brain controls the 4 senses, and 1 bias opposite the heart, because the heart controls touch. And then the Gra further subdivides the sense of touch. Says the Gra, there are 4 parts of touch. Action, maisa, with your hand, clapping. Ha'alicha, walking. Sheberegal. Shimush, relations. V'hamishush, touch. Shebechal haguf. Ela shekol arba shem echad lahem. But all of them fall under the general umbrella rubric of touch. But they could be further divided into maisa, halicha, tashmish, mishush. And they all trace back to the heart, as opposed to... So in other words, even though there are 4 kinds of touch, they're all rooted in the sense of touch. But the 4 types of senses of the head, each one has an independent gateway and place in the brain. Shmiya has a special gateway from the ear to the brain. Riyah has a special gateway from the eye to the brain. Smell has a special gateway from the nose to the brain. Taste from the tongue to the brain. Therefore, in the Shalroish, each one has a special bias, connected the special gateway that each sense has. But the shalyad, that we demonstrate the connection between the lave and the sense of touch, only has one gateway, even though it can be broken up into 4 parts. In fact, Rabbi said the Gra in the Adaras Eliyahu says that these 4 subdivisions of touch which are Maisa, Asiya, Shimush, and we're going to see the Halicha are Rashi Tevos Maisa. Says the Gra Yadu Kenyani Adam Him Gimel Dvarim. Man has 3 parts to him: Dibur, Maisa, Machshava. Speech, action, thought. But Maisa has many subdivisions. So you have Halicha. The 4 kinds of Maisim are Mishush Baguf, the touching of the body could touch. Asiya, with the hands. Shimush, Halicha, Rashi Tevos, Maisa. Maisa stands for Mishush, Asiya, Shimush, Halicha. On that note, we're going to take a 30-second break for some hydration. Give me 1 second. Okay, so this is the amazing revelation based on the Mateh Moshe and the Eliyah Rabbah and the Rosh and the Gra in the Biurei Agados and the Adaras Eliyahu. Namely, the Tefillin Shel Rosh correspond to the 4 senses, which are very separate, and therefore they're represented by 4 separate batim, as opposed to touch, which even though it could be further divided into Asiya, Shimush, Mishush, Asiya, Shimush, and Halicha, but they're all rooted basically in one, and therefore they're connected to one particular bias. Now, please take a look at number 10, in the Ruach Chaim of Reb Chaim Volozhner. Says Reb Chaim, Shamati me Admar. I heard from the great mentor, the Gra Noisen Tam Leshvach. He's given a very praiseworthy reason. Ala Sher Hatfila Shal Rosh Mefuredes Arba Batim. Why the Tefillah Shel Rosh is broken into 4 parts. Vatfila Shal Yad Mechuberes Yachad, and the Tefillin Shal Yad is connected together. Vahatam Kibareish Yesh Daled Chushim. Riyah, Shmiya, Reach, and Dibur. And they're all separate. Ears to listen, eyes to see, tongue to speak, a nose to smell. By the way, all of these senses exist by the Creator. V'chein boy yisbarach shemai, yesh b'chinos elo. God also has these levels. Beside sviros alyonos, when we say God could see, smell, and so forth, they are in the b'china of the sviros. V'chein b'gufa adam yesh daled chushim. In man's body there are 4 senses. Like Chazal say, the lave understands, the kidneys give counsel, the spleen grinds, and touch. But they're all connected on the outside. All of these senses exist in the Sfiros. We find in the Pasuk, Einei Hashem, Oznei Hashem, Libi, Yad Hashem. These are all referring to the Sfiros Al-Yoinos, and the reason the Torah writes it that way is L'saber es ha'oizen, to allow us to process Al derech mashal v'dimyon, in a manner of parable. And therefore, and with this, David comes to be disparage those who worship Avodah Zarah. When David says, Pelo hem v'lo yidaberu, they have a mouth and they don't speak. Ratzaloymar, if they're a god, then it's an embarrassment that they have a mouth and they don't speak. So the first embarrassment is what God has a mouth. But to add insult to injury, it's even worse that they have a mouth and they can't speak. Lachein, in the Shalrosh, they're separate. Keneged the Dal Chushim, and Tfil Shayad, they're Mechubarim. Keneged the 4 Chushim that are in the body, and they're all considered Chativa Achas. Okay. Now, when the Gemara talks about the Tefillin of Hashem, it's a reference to Hashem being mashpia, shefa, from the Sfiros Elyonos. By the way, the idea that we have 5 chushim is marumas in the karbanis of the Nesiim, atudim chamisha, kivasim b'nei shana, chamisha, keneged hamizbeach, which is archai, chamesh amos, rachbai, chamesh amos, or keneged the 5 hargashos, which the Manas Kuna says are the 5 senses. Now, says Rabbeinu Bechaye in the Kara Kemach, from the wonders of the creation of man, that God opens up in this great palace, in this great edifice, 5 gates. Man is a great edifice, but what is his interface with this world? 5 gates. And each one of these gates has 5 gatekeepers. The 5 gates are the 5 organs that allow for sense: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the hands. The gatekeepers are the senses, which are sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. But here Rabbeinu Bechai says something amazing. All of these honorable senses, kulan heim be'ever harishain, are all in the chief limb, shehu mivchar mekaymes haguf elyono, which is the choicest part of the body. Milvad chush hamishush, aside from touch, shu miyuchad liyadayim, which is designated for the hands. Umispashe b'chal haguf, and then it spreads to the whole body. V'gam beroish, it's also on the head. Ve'enoi kiyim bargeshus dveikus guf b'guf. Touch is only sensed from one guf to another. Now, these 5 senses, 3 of the senses are spiritual: sight, listening, smell. 2 of them are physical. Right? In other words, sight is an intangible ability. Smell is intangible. Smell is intangible. So listening and smell, taste and touch are physical. Ve'im chosh hatam, chosh hamishush. V'hainu v'chayva hachachma liyoisei kain. Wisdom dictates, God's supernal wisdom dictates that the majority of our senses are spiritual senses. Sight, listening, and smell. The majority of our senses are spiritual, and the minority, taste and touch, are physical. Kedei lelamed ki hakavana bebrias ha'adam liyos chelek hasechel rav u'meskaber al chelek haguf. It's to teach that in the creation of man, man's physical component should be dominant. Umeiroiv malas gimel chushim ruchanim halalu. And because of the great spiritual capacity of these 3 senses, sight, listening, and smell, we find these senses used in reference to God. God saw, Vayar Hashem, Vayishma Hashem, God heard, Vayarach Hashem, God smelled. But by the other 2 physical senses, they're never ascribed to God. Never will you find God tasted. Never will you find God touched. Why? We have 5 senses. 3 are spiritual. Since the majority are spiritual, that indicates that we are created to be spiritual beings. The 3 spiritual senses are associated and ascribed to God. But taste and touch are never ascribed to God. And whatever hana we get in this world, we make a bracha. Now, here's the real why.
What about it says in the Parsha, Etzba Elokimi? Does that imply touch?
You tell me. It's not saying God touched, right? It's not saying he felt. It's the finger of God. So you're right, it does use a reference that limb, but it doesn't reference that sense. Now we cite another amazing Rabbeinu Bechaye. Tailing what Joe just mentioned, Rabbeinu Bechaye says that we have 5 fingers. The Gemara in Ksubas, and I believe Hayamid Bey says, the significance of the 5 fingers, Zeres, Kamitza, Ama, Etzba, Goidal. The Zeres measures the Zeres of the Choshen. Kamitza, that's where you take the Kamitza off on the Karban Mincha. Ama, from the tip of the finger to the elbow, it measured to the length of the arm, is the Ama. Etzba are measuring the Etzbais in Shiurim, and Goidal is also a Shiur. Well, says Rabbeinu Bechaye, each one of the 5 fingers is a attendant of one of the 5 senses. When someone has something on their mouth, they usually use their thumb to wipe it off. The thumb is a servant of the mouth. So have something stuck in your ear, the only finger that fits is the pinky. Someone has something in their eye, they usually use the thumb, this finger. I don't remember what it's called in English, but in Lashon HaKodesh, it's the kamitza. If somebody wants to touch something, the widest and tallest finger is the amma. That's for the sense of touch. If you have something stuck in your nose, don't do it in public. But that finger is designated for the nose. And then you have the thumb again for your mouth. Now we know that before you use any fingers and you want to put them anywhere, it's always recommended to use some Purell before you do so you don't transmit any of the billions of monsters on your finger anywhere that you need to. Likewise, when you're finished doing whatever you need to do, also recommended to use this. They last forever. I don't know anybody who ever used an entire bottle of these things. I have this, it's been here for 20 years already. So, anyway, so you have 5 fingers. Each one of these 5 fingers corresponds to one of the 5 senses. I'll tell you the truth. This Rabbeinu Bechaye is quoted by a Sefer Shmua Toiva, that's quoted by the Sefer Halekach V'Halibov of Rabbi Avram Shur. Now I happen to quote this piece in the Chanukah Sefer, the light and the splendor. And Rabbi Avram Shur called me because it wasn't quoted accurately. So let's say it accurately now. The Rabbeinu Bechaye says in Parshas Tzav, the 5 fingers correspond to the 5 senses. Comes the Holy Sefer, Shmua Toiva, and he says that if you take the gematria of Yad, Goidel, Etzba, Amma, Kmitza, Zeres, you get the gematria 1,118, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The gematria of hand plus 5 fingers is the same gematria as Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And that might be another reason why when we say Shema, we cover our eyes with the 5 fingers. The message being that when we're saying Shema, we are pledging to subjugate and to subordinate our senses to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Being Mekabel Ol Malchus Shamayim, it's not enough just to say I'm going to fulfill all the mitzvahs, but one has to recognize God's sovereignty over all 5 of our senses. And therefore we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We're pledging to subjugate the Zeres, the Kmitza, the Amma, the Etzba, and the Goidal, which are Ra'us, Shema, Tam, Reach, and all the 5 senses, Mishosh to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So now, b'siyata d'shmaya, we could offer a new explanation in what Ula means in the Gemara and Brachas and Daf Yudaled. Because we learned that the main purpose of the Tefillin, we have 4 batim in the head to subjugate sight, smell, hearing, and taste. We have 1 bias in the hand to subjugate touch, and we wear the Tefillin to be meshabed our senses to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is likewise what we do when we say Shema. When we say Shema, we're Makabel Ol Malchus Shamayim, and we're subjugating our senses to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, someone who says Shema, and he is pledging to subjugate his senses to Hashem, but he doesn't want to wear the Tefillin, which aids and assists one to be meshabed his senses to Hashem. He's like being meir edus on himself. He's saying, yes, I want to subjugate my chushim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he's not wearing the tefillin, which assist in that pursuit. So that might be another dimension of what Chazal mean, Kol HaKoreh Shema B'loi Tefillin Ki'ilu Meir Edus Shakar Be'atzmai. As the Mesilas Yesharim teaches us that it's not enough for one's masim to be clean and pure, but we need to make sure that our chushim, our senses, are clean from impropriety. And as these Parshas, the Parshas of Shoivavim, are the Parshas that we endeavor to work on the subjects of Kedusha and purity. So we have the mitzvah of Tefillin, Davka in these weeks, to help us in our avodah of guarding our eyes, guarding our ears, guarding our nose, guarding our mouth, and our sense of touch through the aid of the mitzvah of Tefillin. Thank you everybody for listening, and
Feel better, Rabbi.
thank you. Wishing everybody a great day. Okay, shkoyach.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bezos Hashem. Thank you. We'll see everybody 5:30. Thank you. Okay, I'm good. Don't worry. Shkoyach.
Thank you.
Oh, shkoyach. I'm good. Hashem.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.